going. Um, so what I decided, and you can tell me, I'm very flexible always. So if you could tell me if this is not what if you want to go back to the other thing, but I figured maybe what people keep asking me about, like books I'm reading. I read a lot. I have a lot of books, and I've been reading a lot, and so people keep asking me like cool things. I send lists of books and people say, what do you think about this? So I figured, some of the books that I've been reading, maybe I'll review, just go through some of the books by theme and tie it into like what's going on in the Jewish world and so on. Make it, to try to understand some of the way these books really apply today, and some of the lessons we have from the books. So I figured I'll try one this week, and I threw one maybe in 2 weeks if people are interested. If not, I'll move to something else. In 2 weeks, I figured I was going to do those two books this week, but then I figured people might want to read those. These I doubt. I don't know if as much people are going to read. The morality, definitely, people will read it, but I'll talk about that at the end. The other book, I don't know if people would have been running to read it as much, but the other two books, I think that would be very into it. I finished both of the, the thing. I just have to put together a stuff for it, but I think that those are two things, and we'll see if people like it. I don't mind continuing on these type of things and having like book readings as well as part of a cycle. And we could go to the happiness, and we could go to the, do different things. So to break it up, so it's not all the same every week. So I'm going to share my screen. 1 second. Let me just do that. Does everybody see the screen?
Yes.
Okay, so it says Mavricks, Mystics, and False Messiahs, right? So this is the book. It's a book that's by Penny Dunner. Rabbi Penny Dunner is a rabbi now in California. And he wrote this book on episodes from margins of Jewish history. And so I read it on a plane the first time I read it. It's not one of the ones, I don't believe there's no audio book for it. So I don't believe that there's an audio book. So the people like audio, but I actually didn't look, but I don't believe they would have one on such a book. But he has some interesting things, and I thought it would definitely make for an interesting shiur. And I after we talking about mystics and false messiahs and all these things, I figured I want to contrast each book. So you see, like Never Alone fits very well with Black Wave because you'll see they come together very well. So I figured what book can I go and show with this book to give a different, to show like what should things be a little bit. So that's why I picked Morality by Rabbi Jonathan Sacks. If we look at the introduction to the book, if we look at the table of contents, so he deals with, and I'm going to go through all these different things to give you some of the history. It's this fascinating history he puts together in one book. He talks about Shabtai Tzvi, Falk, Dr. Falk, and I'll talk about the Emden the Get of Cleves, Lord George Gordon, Maral, and this Ignaz Timothy Tribushan Lincoln. So who are these? What are all these things, and what is the connection? The first thing you ask is like, what is the connection between any of these individuals? So I'm going to show you what it is, what the connection between all these are, and it's really all them fascinating history. I didn't think, when after reading the book, I was questioning whether to get the book to begin with, because I actually knew a lot about Shabtai Tzvi, the Yaakov, the Emden Eibeshitz controversy, the Get of Cleves. I did a lot of work on the Get of Cleves, the Morals Haggadah. Those I knew. The other three I didn't really know anything about. So I figured for those three, it would be worth the book. They're interesting, but the key things are those other ones. If you ask me, did he add much to it? He summarized them. I don't know if he added much to everything. And well, let's go through them. They're fascinating cases nonetheless. So what does he say? He says that the connection between all these seemingly unconnected things. He says, rather than looking at a broad narrative of history, the uniting theme of this book is the very individual personalities of these marginal characters and their impact that they had during the time in which they lived. But all the Mavricks whose lives are explored in this book somehow represent in their individuality and their unique stories aspects of the broader narrative of their eras. So, in the first instance, I'm fascinated by how aspects of Jewish history which occurred outside the spotlight had a effect on what was happening on stage. But truthfully, I'm also fascinated by historical aberrations and am drawn by bygone eccentrics. And I would like to think this is because oddities tend to shed light on what's wrong with the system that produced them. If one asks any sociologist or therapist, they would say that the irregularities they deal with on a daily basis are often consequences of problems within contemporary society at large. So he brings together things. I think if you ask me, it sounds like these things that just interest him, and he put them all together in a book and then tried to find some sort of tie-in. But they're all interesting cases, and I think if you don't know them, you'll be fascinated by each of these cases. So let's start off with somebody that probably you heard of, Shabtai Tzvi. I'm not sure people know a lot about Shabtai Tzvi and who he was, but you probably heard that he was a false messiah. And he actually had a very major impact on the Jewish world. So who was he? What was his life? Well, and why were people drawn to him? So the question first we have to ask, and what he asks in the book, is what gave rise to a Shabtai Tzvi? Why did Shabtai Tzvi why was he kind of even entertained rather than being called crazy, which he was? He was crazy. And he was just like off the wall crazy. But why did the Jewish community ever give rise to such a person? So what happened with Shabtai Tzvi is that he came at a time where there was a lot of upheaval within the Jewish world. You had expulsions. There were lots of expulsions. People know of this expulsions in Spain, but there were expulsions pretty much all over Europe of Jews. Jews got pushed aside, pushed out of cities, countries. There was a lot of upheaval. People were moved to new areas. That always led to poverty. When you go, it's very hard for us to move. People always come. I was just talking, somebody moved to the area, and they were talking about all the problems that they're having with moving. They just moved to West Orange, and it's a very, very nice family. And so they put their stuff in storage because they had to sell the house. They put the storage, lost their stuff. Like, it's just crazy. You have to fix the house. There's so much stuff, but that's nothing compared to the people who have to move to like a completely new area, like a new country. You have to learn a new language, have the new culture. Like, even when we make Aliyah, at least we understand the basic culture, right? They're very Western. But what happens when you go to, like, if you saw the tour that they mentioned yesterday in Buenos Aires, how people came from Russia to a country with completely different, and they starved because they didn't know anything. They had like nothing. They didn't know the language. They didn't know the land. They didn't know anything. They had nothing. They had to learn to become farmers. So when you go, so that's what happened. Jews get pulled out and they move and they try to find some sort of Jewish community that they could be with, at least to have some sort of connection. But so Jews were moving all over the place to different places, and they end up in some people end up in Sfas. That's one of the big places. So there are places all over that the Jews move. I'm going to, yeah. I'll just, do I have the, okay. So I'm just gonna mute. Yeah, right. Okay, sorry. So anyway, if you want, you could just unmute yourselves. So anyway, so Jews arrive Sfat, and one of the big things that comes about is mysticism. Mysticism is attractive in the same in to Jews, I'm not a big mystic type of person. I'm much more of a realist, rationalist, than a myst. I don't really get mysticism as much. People are very into it, but a lot of times people fall to mysticism because they believe that they know that there's something beyond the self. It's like kind of, I don't, Lahavdil, it's like Harry Potter in the way that people feel that there's like this magic, or there's this, there's this greater thing, which there is. We know that there's greater than ourselves, and we know that there's a big world that we totally, totally don't understand, right? And this stuff, but there's like these secrets that are passed on. And so, if you just tune into it, you could tune into something so much greater than ourselves by connecting to mysticism much more. And it became very there was a big rise in it. And the early Kabbalists, there was a big focus on redemption. Now, the Mashiach, why is there a Mashiach thing? So the rule of thumb is always very simple. When times are bad, messianic hopes are high. When times are good, so then people, they're okay with their lives. They're not thinking about, oh, I want somebody to take me away from this life. I'm happy with my life. So, if Mashiach comes, great. If not, okay, I'm fine. I'm living fine. Everything's great. I'm not praying, praying with all my heart that somebody's going to take me away from my terrible situation. But when times are really, really bad, and when people are really suffering, they want an out. And so therefore messianic hopes are very high. And therefore, during these bad times, that's when you're going to see a lot of false messiahs. False messiahs will come onto the scene. Shabtai Tzvi was very interesting in the fact that we had false messiahs. We had tons and tons and tons of more false messiahs. In fact, Rav Moshe Feinstein has the funniest tshuva. I mean, it made a name for him. He has this tshuva where he's talking about a get, and we'll talk about getting in soon. And so when this guy, he claimed, he got married, and he claimed that he was the Mashiach. And he used to run around naked in the streets, and he would tell everybody that he was Mashiach. And so they convinced him to put his clothes back on and to come in. And then eventually he was fine for many years, and he decided he was going to get married. He got married, and then off came the clothes, and on came the Mashiach thing. So they brought him to Rav Moshe, and they said, could he give a get? He's crazy. We're going to talk about the get of cleaves and crazy and gets. But so Rav Moshe said, he's not crazy. He thinks he's Mashiach. We think he's wrong. That's not crazy. He's running around without clothes. Yeah, he's running around without clothes. But if he thinks he's Mashiach, maybe he thinks that we've gone back to a time of Gan Eden where people didn't need clothes, so that's why he doesn't have clothes. Only Rav Moshe could come up with such a thing in order to get somebody to get a get, to allow somebody to get a get. But so you see that there's people who believe they become very, very, very into messianic things when times are bad. But Shabtai Tzvi lasted like hundreds of years. Like, it really affected the Jewish world. 100 years later, Rav Yaakov Emden, what we're going to talk about in the Emden Eibeshitz controversy, was already still dealing with this in a big, big way. So we see that Shabtai Tzvi had it. So what was it about Shabtai Tzvi? So the truth is, so let's talk a little bit about Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was born on August 1st, 1626. They say it was Tisha B'Av that year. I don't know. In Izmir, Turkey. That's what they say. His thing, they put him on Tisha. Question is, was he really put on Tisha B'Av? What it was, they say he should be burned in Tisha B'Av, and next thing you know, we're saying he's born on Tisha B'Av. I'm not sure. But anyway, he was extremely talented. He was charming. He was charismatic, and he was brilliant. It's always a bad thing. Too much stuff is bad, especially with charismatic leaders. You always have to be careful when you have somebody who's a very, very charismatic leader, and they're, and they seem to be very brilliant, and and talented and all this stuff. If they're too much so then it should raise red flags. People are normal, leaders are normal, you know. It's hard to be everything, you know, and usually I find that when you have somebody who's like that, with a lot of people are swearing and swearing and swearing by him, not every time, but there are times that you'll see, and I've seen it so many times in my life, where that person will ends up into some sort of scandal, because they start to believe sometimes about their own infallibility. They have some quirks that people don't know about. I'm not saying every case, you know, sometimes you have some great people. I'm not saying that everybody, but you know, too much of anything, you see from Shlomo Melech that too much of anything is not good. Even too much wisdom is not good. So he happened to be crazy. So he was people would follow him and follow him. And then he started doing crazy, crazy stuff. Let me give you an example of some of the crazy stuff that he did. He married a Sefer Torah. He wasn't married. He decided that he should be married to a Sefer Torah. So he had a whole wedding where he married a Sefer Torah. Of course, the rabbis thought this was absolutely off the wall. And then they end up throwing him out. So they throw him out of the community. So he goes from community to community. Another thing he did is he dressed up a fish to represent the fish. It's a Mashiach. He wrote he told everybody that they have to start making brachos over their sins. It was just crazy. He was doing crazy stuff. And so what happens is he comes in, he wows everybody with his thoughts and so on. All the people start following him, coming to his classes. His classes get very popular. People come to him. And then they come visit him on Shabbos. He becomes ready, and then he starts with the Mishagas, right? They start telling people crazy stuff, and then it starts leaking to other rabbis, and they start going, "What? Stay away from this guy. He's crazy," right? And then all the rabbis of the town get together and say, "You got to go because you're just off the wall." And then he goes to the next thing. Now, one of the things that comes around with these type of things is, especially people who get very excitable and very, you know, they tend to have they could be manic depressant, and it sounds like he had that. I'm not a psychiatrist. I don't diagnose, but he had long bouts of depression, and then he would spend, like, you know, long periods of time studying or whatever, and you know, getting everybody riled up, and then he'd go into a depressed state. So he sounded like he had, you know, serious issues, and really, he was thrown out from community to community. He should have been nothing. He really should have been just like this blip in history. But he turned out to be a big thorn in the side of the Jewish people. Why? So what happens to him at the end of the day? Do you know what happens to him? Oh, well, I'll talk about it in a second. I'll go through what the end result of Shabtai Tzvi was.
He converted, didn't he?
Yes, he converts to Islam, but he converts to Christianity, he converts to Islam. But I'll tell you why. It's a crazy story in and of itself. All these things are crazy stories, by the way. Every single one of these things in this book is crazy. So the problem was not really Shabtai Tzvi. Shabtai Tzvi was crazy. So in some ways, Shabtai Tzvi could get somewhat of a pass because he was really off the wall himself in his mind. The problem was this guy, Nathan of Gaza, or Nathan the prophet. This guy was a real Russia. So he was a PR guy. That's basically what. Very talented writer and a PR guy. And what he did is he manipulated Shabtai Tzvi. So he went and wrote letters to all the communities, built Shabtai Tzvi up to be the biggest, greatest person ever. He himself claimed to be a healer. He convinced Shabtai Tzvi that he was the Mashiach. He was one that really convinced them, right? Then he'd work the community that he was next going to, build them up to be like the greatest guy ever, stir people up, and then he'd bring in Shabtai Tzvi to get them going. So, you know, to get like, it was his own like power trip thing. Till the people realized, so didn't take that long. People would get excited about Shabtai until he got his Mishagas going, and then they throw him out, right? So what happens? So the communities get very frustrated with all these guys. Like these guys are claiming that they keep pushing this Kabbalah. They keep saying they have powers. He claimed to have healing powers. The end result of them was that Shabtai Tzvi was told, was the community, nobody, the Jewish people didn't want him anymore. He was like, he was burning himself up from all the different communities. Even Nathan of Gaza, the Sultan heard that he could do, because he told everybody he could do all these miracles. So he calls him in and says, okay, so heal me. And so, of course, they couldn't. What happened is he was forced to convert, and they converted. He converted. He was banned. Shabtai Tzvi was converted. He was banned, and he dies in isolation on September 17, 1676. Nathan dies at age 37 in 1680. And so these guys, it's a crazy story. They brought all this, just craziness around. But the thing that they did do is they pushed a kind of thought of Kabbalah that that resonated within the Jewish people for a very long time. And this would come in the Yaakov Emden and Yonasan Eibeshit's Machlokes 100 years later, which we're going to talk about. That's going to really come to its head. That's when it's going to really come to its head. But for years, what they did within communities by going from community and pushing a certain type of Kabbalah, certain type of thought, stayed with the regular people who didn't know so much. There were people who just didn't know, and others who were very inspired by this new idea of Kabbalah and how, remember what before, Kabbalah was supposed to be something that was handed over from student to teacher in a very quiet way. Here now, they're telling everybody about these mysticism and the secrets that are involved in the world. And now all of a sudden, people are very intrigued and start looking into it and studying it. And it's slowly festering over the years. We'll take a little bit of break from this, and we're going to come back to it soon. In the book, he then turns to Samuel Falk. Who was Samuel Falk? I never heard of any of these three guys, and they're all kind of minor characters, although they take up most of the book. The biggest one that takes up almost a lot of the book is this guy, Lincoln, who I never ever heard, Trabish Lincoln. I did find all of a sudden, I found some articles, and I'll show you on the line that shows you, fascinating guy. I never really would care too much about these guys, but it's interesting to read in the book. Falk got famous. Samuel Falk was, who were they? So Falk, this picture, you see this picture of Falk? Everybody thought this was the Baal Shem Tov. That's what made Falk so happy. This picture was sold at all. Everybody was convinced this was the only picture that we had of the Baal Shem Tov, but it was Falk. And it went for like crazy amounts of money at auction because people were convinced that this was the Baal Shem Tov. So that was pretty much the most famous thing about Falk. He was very charismatic. He was very, very charitable, a good guy, but he was crazy. He had a lot of crazy practices. And the highlight really of the thing was that particular picture. Most of the book he takes up by this guy, Ignaz Timothy Trabish Lincoln. Who was this guy? So I'm going to go. Do you see this? Do you see the webpage? Who was this guy? This guy was the biggest charlatan that you ever heard of. It's actually fascinating. I'll send out the thing. It's just interesting to see. If you want to, you can look it up also. I'll put out the link. This is him. He was one of the most remarkable adventurers, scoundrels, fraudsters of the 20th century. He pretended he was a mission. He grew up as an Orthodox Jew, but he fooled everybody. He pretended that he was a missionary. He pretended he was a spy. He basically went around. he got to become an MP for a while. He just like faked everybody out on everything. He was very dynamic. He was a great speaker, and there he is as a spy. He was like, it's crazy. He did like all these crazy things. He would convince people of all this nonsense that he would do, that people, that thing, and eventually, again, people picked up on him, and there he is as a Buddhist. He just like took on different roles, whatever would make him, popular at the time, and he got kind of kicked around a lot too. It's there's somebody wrote a book on his life, and so he put a lot of the things in it. It's interesting, very marginal character in the Jewish world. Just interesting in the sense of, again, you have somebody who's very dynamic, a good speaker, who is able to fool the people. Lord Gordon, I don't want to spend too much time on Lord Gordon. Lord Gordon actually was, he started the Gordon riots in England. Somebody who he got sentenced to life imprisonment, and he converts to Judaism for some strange reason that nobody understands, and he becomes an Orthodox Jew. So George Gordon dies as an Orthodox Jew in prison. that's pretty. Nobody really understands why he did it. Okay, let's now turn our attention to the Get of Cleves. This is a very, very important history in Jewish halacha. A lot is written on the Get of Cleves. It really changed the whole issue of Aguna and how to understand. It ripped apart the Jewish world for a while. It was a very big controversy, and when you learn in rabbinic, in smicha and rabbinical school, you have to deal with the Get of Cleves, and we go through a lot of different things with how the Get of Cleves dealt with mental illness. It dealt with divorce. It dealt with a lot of power, and how decisions are made. So it's a very important question. The Get of Cleves is called. So it all starts off with this Mishnah in Gittin. It says, the Mishnah in Gittin says that mi she'achazo, this word kurde yakos. So whoever gets kurde yakos, Damar kisvu get lishti, and write a get to my wife. Lo amar klum. It's like he said nothing. Amar kisvu get lishti. He says, write a get for my wife. The achazu kor de yakos, and then all of a sudden he gets this kor de yakos. The chazar v'amar al tichtovu, and then later on he says, no, don't write it. Ein devar achronim klum. We don't listen to his second words. So this comes up in the Shulchan Aruch. The question is what does this word mean? So the understanding is that it means he's gripped with insanity. He becomes insane. Somebody who becomes insane cannot write a get for his wife. In other words, it goes beyond that. Somebody who's insane, it's not the get per se that we're concerned about. We're concerned about any legal thing that this person is going to do. So if somebody is insane, and then they say, okay, sell all my stock, so that sale would not be valid because they're crazy. If they're seen to be absolutely crazy, so we can't trust their decision making when they're crazy. Now, the question is when is somebody crazy? So the Gemara has different instances. It even says if you walk out at night, like crazy things, there's certain things, they give three different answers, and then the poskim all talk about it. Do you need all three, or is it one? But whatever the case is, if somebody is considered insane, they can't give a get to their wife. They can't do legal matters during the time that they're insane. Now, so this guy, right, I told you the Rav Moshe Feinstein thing, where he applies this, right, in a very creative way, because we want people to be able to give gid. It's very important, because or else the women are stuck, right? And they're stuck. Everybody's stuck. So this came up in this following case. August 12th, 1766, Isaac Nyberg marries Leah Gunzenhauser. Now, this would be a regular wedding. They didn't really know each other so well. The Chassan's family lived far away. They didn't really know each other, but they end up getting married. Right after the wedding, he decides that people are trying to kill him, and he runs away and hides. So they go look for him. They never consummated the wedding, nothing. He just takes off right after the wedding. He just takes off, gone. They find him. They convince him nobody's trying to kill him. Nobody even knows him. This is like he's fine, right? They bring him back. Again, he runs away. He's convinced that people are trying to kill him. Well, though, of course, the wife's family is now very nervous that she married somebody who's crazy, and they don't want her to be stuck, that he's going to run away and leave her, and then she's going to be stuck. So they have him right now. So they take him, and by August 26th, this is 2 weeks later, they convince him to give a divorce, which he's happy to do. He wants to give a divorce because he doesn't want his wife to be murdered by the people who are supposedly coming to get him, which is nobody. So he writes the get, and it seems that everything's fine. All right. This is all until his family finds out. Now, his family is not so keen on this because they wanted him married, and they think that, those financial amounts, there was a lot of things that went on here. And they don't want it just, they don't want him to just get divorced. So they start writing letters. So this hits, so the person who wrote the get was Rav Lifshitz of Cleves. That's why it was the get of Cleves. This comes to Rav Avram Abish Feld, the Av Beis Din of Frankfurt. Now, the Av Beis Din of Frankfurt was a very respected individual. He was a very respected person. He was a big Talmud Chacham. And for some reason, so he takes this case, and for some reason, he decides that the Chassan cannot divorce this wife because he's crazy, and a crazy person cannot give a get. Not only did the family write to him, they wrote to everybody under the sun. They just wrote everybody, right? So he decides that this get is not valid. The get is not valid. Whoa, the family went crazy, right? So the Kala's family went crazy. They start to write everybody, right? So now every rabbi who's worth is getting letters from these families asking to intervene in this case. So people start to write letters, and they saw what Rav Feld writes, that the get's not valid. And that seems very strange, because that's going to have a major effect on everybody who shows some sort of craziness. And are we going to make getting like impossible to get, because people are going to just say they are crazy or run away or something, like they do something crazy, and then you'll never have getting. So they all start, it becomes a whole big war. And rabbis from all over the world are writing letters, and the Noda B'Yehuda. In the end of the day, this tears apart the Jewish world. I mean, it makes everybody look kind of silly, but really it was kind of pretty much the world against Rabbi Feld. But he would not give up. He dug in, and he was very beloved in Frankfurt, and they supported him. And what happened is he had so much agmas nefesh, he had so much pain from this case, that he ends up dying from this. It kills him. And then they decided, then they have to find, this is the interesting thing, the interesting stuff of this is that they have to then find somebody who's going to take over Av Beis Din. So who's going to take over? Because they don't want to take anybody who said against Rabbi Feld. He was too respected, and it would make the community look silly if then they took somebody who took a stand. But everybody took a stand. If you were any big rabbi at all, you'd have to take a stand, except for Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz. Rav Pinchas Halevi Horowitz was the only one who did not write publicly that like big name that could take over the Av Beis Din. He was the biggest name that didn't write publicly against Rav Feld. Turns out that he admits later on that he actually did write it, but he wrote this whole long tshuva, and then at the end of the thing, he spilled his inkwell on the page that he had, and it destroyed the tshuva. And he was like, I'm not rewriting this. It's too long. It's too crazy. I'll take it from a sign from God that I shouldn't publish it. So he didn't publish it, and then he got to take over it. Through this, many laws of Gittin were then clarified because of this this machlokas. And the craziest thing at the end is Leah and Isaac decided to stay married. They were happy. They lived after all that craziness. They decided they really wanted to be married, and they lived together for like to the end of their life. They never ended up getting divorced or anything. So that's all this craziness, and it was really for nothing. That's a crazy ending. All these things in history. Next thing in this this book, it talks about the Maharal's Haggadah. The Maharal's Haggadah did not exist until less than about 100 years ago, when all of a sudden the Maharal's Haggadah comes onto the scene. And it was published by Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg. Now, Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg, that's him. If you see the picture, that is him. He was a gigantic Talmud Chacham. If you go to the Rabbi Yehuda Yudel Rosenberg's website, you could see all the Sfarim that he wrote. He was big Talmud Chacham. For some reason, he decided to forge this Haggadah. This Haggadah was not written by the Maharal. This Haggadah was forged, pretending to be written by the Maharal. In the Haggadah, he talks about the fifth kos. That's the big thing that he mentions in this Haggadah, that the Maharal drank the fifth kos. He drank 5 kos. So we have the fifth kos of Eliyahu Hanavi, and so most people don't drink that kos. We just usually leave it, or some people, we don't drink it as a kos. Even if people do drink it, they won't drink, say, a special bracha on it, and so on. It's not the fifth kos. But he said that you should say the fifth kos. So people started to go, if the Maharal said it, we should do it. If the Maharal did it, it's good enough for us. Well, it turns out that he forged this book. Not only did he forge this, but he wrote the whole story of the Golem. Where did the story of the Golem that the Maharal, there's nothing that talks about the Maharal's Golem ever, except until there was books coming out in the late 1800s, 1900s by Rav Rosenberg on the Maharal's Golem. That's where all these stories from the Maharal's Golem came from. So here, I put in the hyperlinks. You could see them. There's a great article on this by Dr. Sid Lyman, Rabbi Dr. Sid Lyman, who's is one of the most unbelievable historians today. He's unbelievable. His research is just top notch. When he does research on something, it's like everybody takes it. He's the one who does all the research. I mean, his stuff is amazing. If you go to the Lyman archives, it's just unbelievable, brilliant stuff. He's probably the world's expert on the Emden Eibeshitz controversy. The Get of Cleves, I believe Rabbi Rakefer wrote his PhD on it. I have his book on it, but his PhD. But Emden Eibeshitz, Emden was Rav Yaakov Emden. Rabbi J.J. Schachter wrote his PhD on Rav Yaakov Emden. I'll talk about him in a little bit. But the Maharal, so Sid Lyman did all this research on him. This Rebbe Rosenberg. He found, it's a great lecture if you want to see it, on the Maharal of Prague that he has. He has actually a lecture on it. And so he goes through Rosenberg, and he's like, what? His question is why such a great Talmud Chacham would bother forging or making up these stories that the Maharal had a golem when there's no proof for the Maharal's golem? So what his end thing was that they had a dinner in and I have it in there. They had a dinner when on his 75th birthday, for Rosenberg's 75th birthday, they did a dinner in his honor. And he goes through the whole booklet of the dinner. And he had all these great great people all put in things about Rabbi Eliezer. So all the great names wrote how amazing this person was. And then it says, it lists all he has 31 works, Rabbi Rosenberg. And what in one of the works, so it says works of fiction, the golem. So Dr. Lyman says that he thinks that the whole reason that Rabbi Rosenberg, he didn't do it as like a real thing. He did it as because it was during the time of the Haskalah, when everybody was turning to literature. And when you're turning to literature, they wanted some Jewish literature. Maybe he thought that maybe if we attract people to Judaism by having Jewish stories and Jewish literature. And there was a whole rumor that the Maral had, there was stories being told from generation to generation that the Maral had a golem. So he figured, I'll make a golem story so to attract people to Jewish religious ideas, and not just going to the whatever secular books that people are turning to. So that's why he thinks he wrote the Maral. Doesn't explain why he wrote the Maral's Haggadah. That is a big mystery. He never admitted it in his life that he did it, but people assume now that the Maral's Haggadah is a forged Haggadah. We'll talk about now, the biggest of it is the Emden Eibeshitz controversy. Emden, Eibeshitz, Emden, both pictures are probably fake. Here's an article on it, where Jew pictures come from. Nobody could verify any of these pictures that they mean anything. It's not like somebody had a thing and they sketched out these people. I think it's just had a, they did it based on, people want to see pictures of somebody. So this is, so you get a picture. But if you actually look at these pictures, they kind of show a little bit about the personalities of these individuals. It's interesting because Rav Lichtenstein, I went to Rav Moshe Feinstein's funeral. I was in high school when Rav Moshe Feinstein died. I went to MTA. MTA, they took us all to Rav Moshe Feinstein's funeral. And they were Hespedim. I didn't understand a word of it. It was all in Yiddish. I was also number 1,000 in the back or whatever. So I was by a speaker, but I didn't understand any of it. I was in Yiddish. After Rav Moshe, so when Rav Moshe died and Rav Aaron Cutler died, so Rav Lichtenstein, Rav Aaron Lichtenstein, who is the Rosh Hashiva of Gush, the son-in-law of Rav Soloveitchik, and he passed away as well. But he was I learned with him. He was my Rebbe in Israel when I was in Israel. Brilliant man. But he said that if you compare the eulogies of Rav Moshe and the eulogies of Rav Aaron Cutler, you would think that they were the same person, and yet they were so completely different. Rav Aaron Cutler was a firebrand, spitfire type of personality, and Rav Moshe was the grandfatherly, sweet, grandfatherly figure individual. They're very, very different, and yet they make them out to be like a cookie cutter, geniuses when they were born type of thing. Rav Emden and Rav Eibeshitz were very different personalities. Rav Yaakov Emden, was brilliant scholar, loner, who stayed in his house. He had his own minyan because they kept he was put aside by the community because of his fight with Eibeshitz. He was a very, very tough individual. If Yonason Eibeshitz was the grandfather, a sweet person, very dynamic. People loved him. He had lots and lots of followers. He cared about people. He seemed to be a very, very type of sweet individual. So why would these two people get into a big machlokas? So let's talk about Rav Yaakov Emden. Yaakov Emden was the son of the Chacham Tzvi Ashkenazi. You ever heard the Chacham Tzvi? They talk about him. So he was a Rav, and in his town, when Rav Yaakov Emden was 15 years old, a person named Nehemiah Chaya Chayun comes to town, and he's a hidden follower of Shabtai Tzvi. Now, remember, this is like almost like 80 years after Shabtai Tzvi, but he really believed in Shabtai Tzvi's teachings, and so they called them a Sabbathians, and he and other Sabbathians wanted to bring that stuff to Judaism, and it started a whole war. People didn't want to have. They were sick of Shabtai Tzvi. They wanted to get rid of that stuff. It was they did crazy stuff. I mean, the Sabbateans did crazy stuff, and the early Kabbalists, they did crazy stuff too. I mean, they would we're talking about like jumping jacks and shul flips, a lot of sexual crazy practices. I mean, they did some weird stuff. These, especially the early Kabbalists, they were, and the Sabbateans, they called for some wild stuff that was really against like everything that we would find moral today. People would just say, "Oh, that's crazy," you know. But so he starts bringing and in order, so the Chacham Tzvi, who was the rabbi, came out very strongly. He and a number of other rabbis came out very strongly against these Sabbathists. Well, what happened is they decide that they're going to destroy Chacham Tzvi, and they do a good job because they made life so unlivable that the town said, "Look, we just want everybody to leave. We can't take this fighting anymore. Everybody's got to go. Chacham Tzvi's got to go. Nehemiah's got to go. Everybody go, right?" So they fired him, and they got rid of and because of it, he really made his life kind of miserable. So the Chacham Tzvi, so Rav Yaakov Emden he dedicates his life to stamping out Sabbatheism. And so he's just a regular, he's a big Talmid Chacham. He's brilliant mind. Rav Yaakov Emden, brilliant. He's the only one that we actually have a diary. He wrote his own diary, and that's what Rav J.J. Schachter does for his PhD, bases it. He's the only one who actually has a diary that we know of, like a real diary. We have traveling diaries and so on, but he has he tells his innermost secrets, like a real I mean, it's it's a difficult diary, but he really tells his life. He had a very difficult life. If you look at the ends, he lived from 1697 to 1776. He outlived 3 wives and most of his 20 children. So he suffered a lot. He dealt with a lot of death within his life. So he decides that he becomes the world expert in who is a hidden Shabtai Tzvi person, and he's going to get rid of them and write them. Now, he has a printing press in his house. So when you come against his ire, he will just keep putting out pamphlets and books and everything, and just attack and attack and attack and attack. And so that's what he did. And it came out that somebody came to town. So anyway, so he has this printing press. So he's going to use against Rav Yonasan, who's the rabbi was the Eibeshitz. His father was the rabbi of Eibeshitz. Okay, who is Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz? He lived 1690 to 1764. So if you look at he died in 1776. He died in 1764. He was the rabbi of the 3 communities. That was always the big three communities. And in 1725, this crypto-Sabbathian preacher named Moshe Meir of Zolkwu, he came to town with a manuscript, and this manuscript he claims was written by Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz. And so they started to look into Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz. Now, one of the other things, Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz was a rabbi. He was a Rosh Hashiva, but he was also a rabbi. And so people came to him for all types of things. And so what they did come to him, one of the big things is for healing. People, in the old days, you got sick. It's not like you go to the hospital and you get, you start researching what medicines and what, I don't know what trials there are out there. No, in the old days, you go to the local doctor, and he says, look, if he did less harm than, mostly they did more harm than good. Almost it paid probably not to go to the doctor in those days than to go to the doctor, because most of the time the doctors did much more harm than they did good. So if you just kind of let the body heal, you had probably a better chance of living than you did if you went to the doctor. So people would go to the rabbi when they were sick and had issues or couldn't have children or whatever, and they'd ask for the rabbi to daven for them or to do something. So what he did is he wrote prayers, he wrote amulets for the people to have to daven with, and to for their prayers to be answered. Well, Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz, I mean Rav Yaakov Emden gets a hold of these amulets, and he finds that he says that, look, they are full of stuff from Shabtai Tzvi, crazy stuff. So he starts a campaign against Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz. Now the community they loved Yonasan Eibeshitz. Everybody loved him. So they just told Rav Yaakov Emden, you stay in your little thing. You could have your own minion. They lived like 2 blocks apart, but they only saw each other once ever in person, because Rav Yaakov Emden stayed in his own house and he just wrote and wrote. And so this came to such people as the Noda B'Yehuda of Yecheskel Landau, to the Vilna Gaon, but they were young at the time and they didn't want to take a position on these things. Although many people were concerned that Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz really did have Sabbathian things in his stuff. And the truth is today, this question is still never answered. If you ask, I asked Dr. Lyman whether he thinks it is, did he have any, and he said, look, there's a lot on both sides of the coin. It's not simple. He doesn't want to like commit one way or the other, but it's not simple to say that he didn't have stuff which followed some of the things that Shabtai Tzvi was saying. And so anyway, he swore that he didn't. He went to other rabbis to get himself cleared. But nobody, people just didn't want the machlokas. And it turned into a big machlokas. But the good thing about this was, after this machlokas, they rooted out all the Sabbathian was dead after this. I mean, Yaakov Emden went on a tirade ripping apart Sabbathianism. And he's the one who's could be credited for getting rid of, the Sabbathians from the world. The crazy thing about this story, each story has some crazy thing. What's the crazy thing about this story is these are the graves of Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz on the left, Rav Yaakov Emden on the right. What happened is when Rav Yaakov Emden died, so they dug up the grave right next to Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz. But it turns out that they couldn't, they had a problem, some sort of issue, and they just had that was the grave that they dug up, and it went to the court. They went to the rabbi, and they're like, what do we do? Could we bury Rav Yaakov Emden right next to Rav Yonasan Eibeshitz? That would be crazy. That would be crazy. But he's like, you know what? This is Min HaShemayim. We're stuck right now, and it must be that God wants this. Supposedly, when he died, Rav Yaakov Emden, they say his last words were, "Oh, welcome, Rav Yonasan, my Rebbe," or something like that. Well, I don't know of that stuff, but anyway, they're buried right next to each other. Okay, so with all these books, I figured, I don't know what time it is, but with all these books, I figured I just wanted to take a few minutes to talk about the book for, what time is it? Sorry, I have all these things here. I don't know. I can't see the time. Oh, it's 9 o'clock. Okay. So maybe I'll just talk about it maybe next time. But I wanted to talk a little bit about Morality, which is the book of Rabbi Jonathan Sacks, because we're talking about all these fakers and just kind of lack of morals, where morality does not exist. And Rev Jonathan Sachs wrote this great book. I already listened to it. I got the audio book. I listened to it already twice. I listened to it twice, and then I reviewed it just for this, this. I'm not going to have time to really go through it now. So maybe we'll come back to it again. But what he talks about in general is the move. And the thing about Jonathan Sachs is if you listen to his stuff, so then it's basically, it's kind of a repeat. It's very good that this was his last work, I think, in the sense of, I mean, it's not good that we don't have more, but since we're stuck with saying this book kind of really does summarize his life work. It really does. It's if you read, I mean, I've read pretty much most of his books, a good majority of them. I read them, and I think that this really summarizes a lot of his things, and it really turns the attention in all these things. I thought that all these people and all these things are really focused on the me, on myself, and not on the we and what's good for the Jewish people or good for society or good for others. But all these people, these charlatans, or the people who the Eibishitz and is not, they're all ripping apart everything. But what's good for the Jewish people is, is that really the question, or is it, is there other questions, especially at the all the get of Cleaves, all these things have this question of that we really need to ask is what is good for society, and that's one of the things with the we that Rabbi Sachs deals with. So I guess we'll have to come back to this book, Morality, talk more about it in depth. But I thought it might mix in well with this crazy book that we have, Mavricks, Mystics, and False Messiahs. All right, so it's a break, and again, I look forward to your feedback on all these things. Tell me if this is a thing that you are interested in, and maybe we'll mix it up a little bit and having every once in a while have different types of stuff, so we could have a varied experience in class. Have a great night.
Thank you, Rabbi. So we end 2020 with the crazies and start 2021 with the morality.
With
so
the morality,
I like that idea.
Yeah, that's a good one. Yes. All right. Thank you all for coming to the class.
Thank you, Rabbi.
Will you thank you. Share the links?
What?
Will you share your links?
Yeah, I'll send it out. I'll send it out again. I'll send it out on my Shabbos before my Shabbos email.
Great. Thank you.
Thank you.
All right. Good night.
Good night.